Allora, bentrovati, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to you all to the Rimini meeting. Today we're going to have yet another interesting session to deal about very interesting topics on the occasion of this huge event, major event. It is an event which is fortunately again with people present. So that's the title of this morning, Between Federalism and Centralism, What Prospects for the Regions? This is a topic that has been long debated during these months of the pandemic. We're going to address the same issue here at the Rimini meeting, and we are also going to try and take stock of what has taken place so far, to try and see what the next evolution of the topic will be. So between federalism and centralism, what prospects for the region? Let me greet Mariastella Gelmini, Minister for Regional Affairs and Autonomies. Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for being with us today. I'd like to greet Giovanni Toti, the President of the Liguria region. Thank you, Mr. President. Arno, Kompatscher, the President of the Autonomous Province of Bolzano. Good morning. In a couple of minutes, we're going to have with us Francesco Acquaroli, the President of the Marche Regional Board. And then I'd like to greet also Professor Cassese, Judge of the Constitutional Court. Thank you very much, Professor. He's connected with us from remote. I'll be with you in short. And I would like to greet and thank our dear guest, Andrea Simoncini, the Deputy President of the meeting foundation meeting for friendship among people. He's a professor of constitutional law in Florence. I'd like to leave the floor to you, Professor. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? We do hear the speaker. Yes, it works. Apologies. That's because we're live. So very briefly, I would very much like to thank you all on behalf of the Rimini meeting, on behalf of President Scholz, the Minister Gelmini. We would like to express our gratitude to Minister Gelmini, President Toti, President Kompatscher, and President Acquaroli, who will be with us soon, for accepting our invitation to this meeting. And then, of course, it goes without saying also, thanks a lot to Professor Cassese, with whom we've been debating for so long. So the Rimini meeting, as early as last year, decided to focus on regionalism. Last year, we were celebrating 50 years from the setting up of the Italian regions, starting from 1970. And this year we would like to again dwell upon this topic, because it is very much in the Rimini DNA, Rimini meeting DNA, to address the issue of politics, the topic of politics, as everybody's responsibility. And regions were initially conceived to support the work of the Italian Parliament, whereby we could have 20 venues in which a new political class could be trained, in which new politicians could be trained, capable of expressing and interpreting the needs of their populations. A lot of time has since then gone by. Today, we are called upon to, in a way, contextualize what has taken place, everything in this specific context, in which this kind of broadening of the political base appears to be in a counter trend, so to say. In other words, we've recently approved a constitutional reform whereby the number of parliamentarians is going to be cut down. So this is still a big issue. Before leaving the floor to Roberto Inciochi, I'd like to seize this opportunity to thank him a lot, to thank Sky TG24 for their professionalism and for their knowledge of the political and institutional world. So thanks a lot to all participants, and I sincerely hope that this debate will help us move on very positively. The floor back to Roberto. Thanks a lot, dear Professor. So we have President Acquaroli, who's just joined us. Good morning and welcome. Good morning, President. Okay, there's all of us here. So today's session is the direct follow-up of last year's event. 12 months have passed, lots of things have happened, so I would like Professor Cassese to give us the context in which we are then going to have this debate. Professor, you have the floor. Well, last year, we kind of took stock of what had happened after 50 years of the regions, after the reform of 2001. Today, we have yet an additional stress test, so to say. The regions, I believe, did well in dealing with health problems in Italy. There have been lots of differences. There have been regions which we expected to be very efficient, and in fact, they weren't, but then kind of made up for what they haven't done before. And on the other hand, we had regions from which we did not expect so much, which however, proved to be avant-garde in the front line. So the picture is varied, but there's a negative aspect. The negative aspect concerns the fact that the National Health Service has been, so to say, kind of divided. So those who wrote the Constitution and who actually guided us in the following 50 years, they mostly focused on fascism and Nazism when they referred to, for example, the national health system, the national statistical system, the national protection system. I mean, this national was, in a way, to be opposed to fascism and Nazism. What did they want to express with this? Basically, they wanted to say that there was the need for them to make sure that all citizens could benefit from equal services. And to do that, it was necessary to grant everybody fundamental rights with adequate systems that were defined national systems. And they were national because they were not central, they were not peripheral, they were not state systems, and they were not regional. But they were characterized by the, in a way, combination of all of this. If you read the corresponding pieces of legislation, you can find evidence of what I am trying to explain to you. Now, this fabric has kind of become torn. So the regions worked well, but the national health system did not work well. Basically because there haven't been trade union because the various individual systems. Let me give you some examples. The Constitutional Court issued a ruling 32 this year, and basically stated that that health is actually a state responsibility. But how could have the state operate for the vaccination campaign if there was just one ministry in Rome, if the network were not there? Let us also talk about ruling 168 on the health system in Calabria. That ruling is an appeal to work, because it basically stated that it is not enough to send someone for the extraordinary management of the system, because actually it is a whole structure of the regional health system that does not work. So it is not enough to simply send one person there to guide and to lead, because even if you have the best commander-in-chief, unless you have a good army, you're not going to win. The third element that emerged from this kind of stress test was characterized by the clear asymmetry between the central and the peripheral decision-making systems and mechanisms. Clearly, a central system based on parliament has decision-making processes which are slower than the decision-making processes of a presidential system like the one that we have in the regions. And therefore, yesterday, President Federica rightly pointed out that presidentialism was introduced in the regions because back then we thought that it could be useful to make an experimentation, and based on this experimentation, it could be possible to introduce some form of presidentialism at a national level. So from this point of view, once again, the regions did well, and the state did not do well. But then, among the regions, differences emerged. And these differences reminded me of what happened in Europe in the 1600s. You probably remember that there were two big kings, Francis I and Carl V. The former was the King of France, and he would lead his troops in fighting his wars, while Charles V was actually secluded in Madrid. He would look at the reports, he would make sure that his generals were the best generals, and he would make sure that the troops could be provided with supplies, adequate supplies. And actually, Charles V won all the wars, and not the former. What do I mean by this example, with this example? I mean that regional presidentialism has unfortunately become regional presentialism. And this presentialism has not always given, because if you have an administrator, you have to make sure that you have a good strategy, that you have good troops, that the necessary financing, the necessary staff, and then the last aspect, the absence of horizontal solidarity between regions. Let me give you an example. 45 years ago, the biggest southern bank, the Cassa di Risparmio della Lucania e della Calabria, was in dire straits, and these difficulties were overcome only thanks to the intervention of the Cassa di Risparmio delle Province Lombarche, so a bank from northern Italy. Probably this bank was interested, it had an interest in actually having the banks in the south, but I can tell you that it did so as a sign of solidarity of the north to support a large part of the south, because that would include the vast majority of the Calabria territory and of Basilicata's territory. And nothing of the kind was seen in this stage. And I think this is something negative of our regional experience. So what can we do in this respect? I believe there are four main things we can do. First, we should not follow the idea that new regions should be set up. I happened to read a number of drafts, a number of bills, which actually would have Rome as a capital, the capital of Rome as a new region. And actually, we do not need another 21st region, because that would be negative also for the region of Lazio, which would be some kind of a surrounding region around the other region of Rome. As you know, Rome has one of the largest cities in Italy and in the world. I think it is better to rethink about the idea that of macro regions. We have to rethink the issue of macro regions and the territorial extension of macro regions. Then, when we're called upon to take stock of this experience, the Gelmini Committee, which, upon the initiative of the Minister for Regional Affairs Bollino, led to the setting up of the regions, and Francesco Mazzocchi, a student of a professor from the University of Milan, also focused on a methodology on the ideal size of regional functions. There are regions which have to be, there are functions that have to be transferred from the state to the regions, or functions that have to be returned from the regions to the state, because the ideal size, so to say, the ideal extent of functions change over time. Third, there's a third thing we need to do. We need to rebuild this kind of torn fabric. And to do that, we do have a tool, and the tool is in the hands of the region. It is the so-called regional working group, work group between the regions. It is within that setting that the concept of nations, of the nation, should be rebuilt. And then there's one last point, the relationship between technology and politics. We know that there are, if you look, for example, at the budgets of the regions, you can see that at least 2/3 of the financial resources are destined to the health sector. However, if we were to take stock of the political influence on this budget, we would discover that the health sector actually makes up of about 100% of the political influence, because this political influence now reaches leading positions, or, for example, the managerial positions in the health sector. One of the most important Italian doctors once told me that it is not the best who are chosen, but rather the ones who are most appreciated by politicians. So this attempt is actually what regions should do. They should not imitate the state. They should not basically imitate the state in organizing the political wishes of the state. And this is actually one of the tasks that region should carry out if they want to pursue. So,
grazie professore, perché insomma ci ha messo su.
thank you, Professor. You've given us so much food for thought that probably this has been really very interesting. So, dear Madam Minister, I'd like to start with you. So, Professor Cassese talked about the stress test. He talked about the a torn national health system, then the symmetry of the decision-making system. Lots of food for thought. Can you give us a first comment? Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I would like to greet all the friends of the Rimini meeting. I come here every year, but it's always really touching to come here. And I like to, I'm happy to say that not even the pandemic has been capable of decreasing the enthusiasm and the willingness to have open exchange of ideas that you can find here at the Rimini meeting. Also, thanks a lot for the topic that you wanted to choose, so the courage to say I. When I read this title, at the beginning, I did not understand. Actually, I was kind of misled to think that you were, that you wanted to talk about individualism. But that, as President Mattarella said, the eye willing to make a step forward actually was seen, and that was seen, for example, and shown by police forces, by doctors and nurses, by the many people who have taken on their responsibility and who have built a community. So, to come back to the words of Professor Cassese, the pandemic has certainly been a stress test. Some criticalities have emerged. The flaws of the state and of the health system have become manifest. However, I would also like to point out that we cannot but be aware of the fact that, first, we have faced an exceptional circumstance. The pandemic was something unexpected, and it was of a huge magnitude. Furthermore, as Professor Cassese said before, the very same Constitutional Court gave recommendations on the prophylaxis and reminded us that the fight against the pandemic is a state competence. Then, I wouldn't like to be so harsh, as Professor Cassese said, because the pandemic is not yet over. And actually, if you want to express a judgment, you have to do it in the end. There has been a region in which regions were kind of blamed for the many things where it seemed that the lack of progress in the vaccination campaign was due to lack of activity of the regions. But then when the state became, started actually taking on its challenges again, and when the state made decisions and actually established what the priority categories of citizens to be vaccinated decided, and the regions reacted very well. 75 million shots could have not been possible without the national health system that is articulated into a number of regional systems, which are all replying very well. Does this mean that things are okay as they are? No, I'm not saying this, but I'm not nostalgic of that season in which we actually had federalists and those in favor of a central role of the state. I think there's a different path to go today, and this is basically indicated by the Constitution. Article 5 says this loud and clear. It says that there is one republic, and the republic recognizes and promotes local autonomies and implements the decentralization of powers and functions. This means that there is a loyal relationship of collaboration between the state and local autonomies, the state and local governments, and through the collaboration, this is implemented. And again, to paraphrase the title of the meeting, saying I means making a step forward. It means taking on a responsibility, and it is through this that you are then capable to face extraordinary situations like the pandemic. So I would like to start from here. I would like to start from this need and call for a loyal collaboration that is to be found in the Constitution that has enabled us to progress with the vaccination plan.
It is true that in this very difficult period, we had two phases. A first phase where there were real problems in the relationship between the state, the government, and the regions. And then with the new government, the Draghi government, the situation improved, the cooperation improved, also thanks to Minister Gelmini. And so, well, things changed. But President Toti, if we talk about solidarity, Professor Cassese said that there was a moment when regions were not in any way devoted to solidarity. Well, first of all, I'm really happy to be here today to come back to the meeting in Rimini, which is an event that I am really attached to, is really something important for me. And if we are here today, it's because many of us are vaccinated. So let's get vaccinated, otherwise we won't be able to organize events like this one. The second aspect, the second things I would like to say is that this debate is really connected with the meeting's title. You had the courage to start from the awareness of the I, because without this awareness, it is impossible to create a community of we. So, well, this is the same kind of balance that there is between local and central power. If we do not enhance that Article 5, as the minister said, the desire of our self-determination, and this the choices that are made in the best possible way, as Professor Cassese said, we won't be able to actually create an efficient state. We will be lacking the basis for an efficient state. So there is no rivalry between the awareness of the I and the desire to be part of a community. And at the same time, we cannot have a rivalry between the central and the local powers. This self-stress, as Professor Cassese said, was really difficult for all of us. I do not want to defend regions, nor want I to accuse the government. We were all subject to terrible stress, and all of us were really put to the test. Sometimes regions were a little bit slower in reacting, but it is also true that the state was also subject to this stress test. If we didn't start vaccinating sooner than we did, it's because we didn't have vaccines, because we had the AstraZeneca problem, because we didn't have the contracts with Europe, and then we had different problems, and well, there were so many mistakes. But all in all, I can say that we can pass a positive judgment on the system of our country, and if this tragedy doesn't make us more ambitious in reforming the system, well, this means that the situation will get worse. I represent the oldest region in Italy. Some other regions have a younger population. Vaccines were distributed at the beginning for a target of population, people from 80 years of age. So some regions had less vaccines than we did. Now we are vaccinating younger citizens. So the General Figliolo has actually created an example of regional solidarity. So today we have really the opportunity, otherwise we will be dealing with the federalism and centralism every year at the meeting. So we have had the courage to have the Draghi government, which is really a brave government that wants the restructuring of the system. Yes, this is exactly, on the second round, we will be talking about what we need to do. Yes, when you want, I will tell you what I believe we need to do. And, President, I remember a few months ago, we said that the pandemic showed that we lack some coordination links among the different levels of government, as Professor Cassese said. Well, yes, this is true. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here. We do not have a we do not have to go back discussing the 2001 reform because some things didn't work out as we expected them to. But we needed to face these problems, in particular the coordination between different government levels. And this is something that happened in Italy, but also in Germany. Germany has a longer tradition in terms of federalism, also experienced this problem. The meeting within the Bundesrat were not the best place to discuss certain problems. So they had meetings of the different presidents of the Länder in order to meet the Chancellor and to discuss specific problems. So they really had to discuss their own federal system. And the same happened in Italy. So we need to turn the Conference of Regions into an institution because the theme is the coordination of the regions. So the conference has to become really the body that deals with that. But actually, this is something that is not even mentioned in terms of reform. So this conference should really become an institution and should be anchored in the Constitution. I believe there was not enough solidarity among regions, I must say this, because many times we did help each other in terms of, for instance, ICU beds, in terms of hospitalizations, and all the meetings we had, obviously online, remote meetings, were very useful for us to understand how we could manage the situation, also in terms of very practical aspects of everyday management. The situation that often led us to an exchange of good practices. And then that moment came when we finally found a model that could really work in the future. There was a long debate on who was to decide upon the general behavioral patterns, wearing masks in restaurants, wearing masks at work, and so on. And then it was our proposal that was actually tabled by the conference itself. That is to say, the regions were trying to really share all of this because this was this piecemeal approach. Everyone was actually choosing for themselves, and that wasn't really the best way regions should behave. But then we decided to draw up guidelines that were then proposed to the government and validated by the scientific committee. So, this is really an expression of the subsidiarity principle, because the problems are better understood where they emerge. And yes, this concept of subsidiarity, we'll go back to this. President Acquaroli. Please, we have already talked about the evolution of the situation, but we'll then go back to Professor Cassese after this first round. You have the word, President Acquaroli.
So first of all, good morning, everyone. It is really wonderful today that we are coming back to normal. The past months have been months in which regions, also in their relationship with the state, have been put under pressure. Facing a pandemic like the one we have seen in various moments, and also with differentiations, because the very same waves of the lockdown actually came differently in the territories, was really complicated. I believe that the first big teaching is that even if autonomies are very important, we cannot but recognize the decisive importance of the state, because ultimately regions have to make choices which are in line with the priorities indicated by the state, by the central state. And local autonomies, local governments in this way have to best represent their territories, and they have to try and give the contribution they can give, because they're closer to the territories. In these months, we have seen how the difference between what could come from the Technical Scientific Committee actually assessing problems from one point of view sometimes was not in line with the problems highlighted by the presidents of the provinces or the regions, because those problems were more typical of the local needs, so health needs and economic needs at the same time. I think that this bridge has to be gap has to be bridged, because the state has to give has to speak with a single voice. I mean, you cannot have different times of application for the actually response measures to such an important event like a pandemic. And then, of course, if you know better a territory, you can actually govern, you can rule certain dynamics better because you know the territory well. But actually, there must be just one guiding line. 20 years after the constitutional reform, if we look forward, Professor Cassese, how should the country behave now in view of what has been done in the pandemic?
Well, we shouldn't make decisions now. We first need to collect all the elements we need in order to know before deciding. And that's what we need at the moment. We need to give some answers. For instance, why there wasn't someone like General Figliuolo in our health service? Why did we have to actually go and find someone who is a member of the Italian army in order to organize the vaccination program? And why didn't regions take up the good practices? And there are some regions that are really advanced in terms of healthcare systems, but some of them are really lagging behind. So why don't we apply good practices? What is the communication channel we are lacking at the moment? Why don't regions communicate? What are the cultural difficulties that make this dialogue impossible? These are the things we need to understand now. First we know, then we decide. Madam Minister, well, I go back to the healthcare issue, because we often mention Calabria, because the national healthcare systems divided into regional system does not work at local level. But Calabria is under the management of a single expert, and it's been so for many years, and this for 10 years, and this doesn't seem to work. So yes, it is true that we have to know before we decide. We have to start from a reality. COVID stresses the weak links in our system. We have to improve local healthcare. We have the resources of Europe, from Europe, to help our hospitals. Then again, we have scholarships, and we have other important training and educational aspects. So there are so many elements that are part of this dialogue, of this cooperation, of this synergy between state and regions in order to actually bridge these gaps. And we started 3 projects, that is to say, that of a differentiated autonomy, because the pandemic took our attention away from some aspects, but there are regions where citizens asked for more autonomy. So the Veneto region and Lombardy, but there are other regions, Piedmont, Liguria, Emilia-Romagna, where no referendum is foreseen, but there are nevertheless some legal choices, some legislative choices that go in the same direction. So this great opportunity that Europe gave us with 230 billion euros should not be decided by the ministries, by the central government. As a government, we know that without team play, without the cooperation with the local bodies, with local administrations, with regional administrations, we cannot go anywhere, because otherwise we will be losing the deadline, missing the deadline of 2026. So we have to use the resources in a very clear and honest way. In order to do so, we needed to work together within the Conference of the Regions. This is an element which is really essential, and we are really aware of this. We are convinced that from the one hand we can use these resources in the proper way, but there are also some deadlines, there is a timeline that we have to follow in terms of reforms. So differentiated autonomy, federal tax systems, and in many municipalities we do not have people who want to be candidates for to become a mayor. So this is a problem. So we know what the mayors have to do. So we should not give up. We have to reform the Consolidation Act and of local governments. And President Draghi said so. And he said, you needed to have the courage to sign, and we have seen what the mayor of Crema decided, because of what he did as mayor of the municipality. Or we have to change a few things. We have to make sure that people are not afraid to sign, and so yes, otherwise we will be stopping the engine.
Minuti corrono velocemente, mi ho buttato palla avanti.
So, President Toti, sorry, I interrupted you when you were talking about what we should be doing from now onward. Well, this is a very difficult concept. First of all, we need to see what did work and what didn't work. There is one thing I can say. I don't want to defend regions once again, but within the Conference of Regions, we spent days and nights, I remember, discussing this issue. So I believe that the first thing that did not work in the distribution of powers among state and regions is that the central state, since 2001, gave up the coordination role it should actually have, and passing it on to the regions. We needed someone like General Figliuolo to coordinate everyone, because we didn't have a coordination body for the healthcare sector at state level. Regions did everything they had to do. If people are getting vaccinated, they are vaccinated with the staff of the regional healthcare systems, and we had agreements with general practitioners, with the local fabric of the healthcare sector. So, well, somehow the government did not actually manage the territory, and it took a step back. It didn't carry out its coordination role, which should be a role that the state has. So we have the Agency for Regional Sanitary or Healthcare Policies that can actually contribute to this coordination, but there are so many other aspects. We should have started with all the staff of in a certain location. So we started the vaccination campaign at state level, but then it was actually carried out at regional level. And then Professor Cassese probably will criticize what I'm saying, but I do believe that at the moment, since we are going through crisis, we should try and copy from someone or somewhere that works better. So, for instance, Germany with its lender, and we have already well, I do think that we should turn the Conference of Regions into an institutions and anchor it in the constitutions like we did for other institutions, other bodies in the past. So we need to reform the powers of the Prime Minister. I am for the figure of a chancellor and the proportional system, but this is something that has nothing to do with what we're saying today here. But anyway, we need to, we're witnessing changes in terms of the political party system, and this needs to be something that we work with. The presidents of the French Republic normally are former mayors of Paris, and this happens in different countries. So, well, people coming from local policies or local powers. So, well, I go back to what we said before about democracy. We should avoid that people who have not the skills and the experience for certain positions are chosen because of their political value, so to speak. So, Professor, very quickly. So he said, President Toti said you could actually criticize him. Is that right? No, well, I'd say that President Toti is right. He talked about application, but there are other examples which is nothing to do with healthcare. Well, for instance, we had a big network that was used for the maintenance of public works. That is to say, the public engineering system. So all these responsibilities need to be distributed. And since the examples of the German lenders was given in Germany for many years, they had the Gemeinschaftsaufgaben, that is to say, common tasks. And what does this mean? It means that there are some tasks, some responsibilities that have to be carried out jointly. So Minister Gelmini was right when she said we have all the elements to solve the current problems, but we have not put them together. This is exactly what we have been missing. So that's why I talked about a tear in our fabric. So the elements are there, we need to put them together. President Kompatscher. Well, I'd like to say that well, I agree with what was said. We should not fall into the trap that the opposite of what we had at the moment is the solution to all our problems. We need to, well, we shouldn't exaggerate. We should not go towards centralism. We need to create coordination places, coordination bodies, and coordination methods. And I believe we should promote the culture of subsidiarity, because self-determination, self-government, local autonomy means responsibility. Responsibility that have to be met at local level, even when you have to make unpopular choices. So I think this is a great advantage when things are decided locally, because when things don't work, people don't go and to make their protests in Rome. In my region, the healthcare service is just 1/5 of our budget. When there is a problem, for instance, the pavement or the road, people turn to the municipal authority, to the mayor, to the president of the province, and we have the possibility to intervene quickly. These are the advantages of a system that is based on the subsidiarity principle, but then we need to have these links, these coordination. Article 120 foresees this substitution of powers, and what we have these Gemeinschaftsaufgaben of the German constitution. Well, Professor, Germans sometimes have the problems also with these common tasks, these Gemeinschaftsaufgaben. It's not easy, but we need to work together, and we need to know that things and problems need to be tackled where they emerge. And you need to have agreement, you need to have joint goals, joint guidelines that should not be imposed from the top. So, well, these are the main aspects. Then not everything that was done during this pandemic was wrong. We often, in my region, look towards Austria or Germany. Many times, Germany and Austria did copy Italy during this crisis, and this has no other examples in history.
So let's now listen from President Acquaroli. I would like to adopt a different stance. We are currently going through a really very new period, and as the minister said, we have a huge opportunity and we should not waste what we have. It is not so much a matter of centralism or non-centralism. It's a matter of priorities. The state has to set itself priorities, and in doing so it has to provide each territory the local answer so that each territory can rediscover its competitiveness and its ability to network with other territories. This is something that takes place also within one region. So each region has the task to give an answer to every municipality or town so that the potential of the local area can be fully exploited. And the same has to be guaranteed also nationally. So autonomies have to be there, but they have in a way to be part of a bigger picture where everybody has its own task and function and its daily tasks, then it can really implement what it can be. And this also vis-à-vis the national framework. Otherwise, the risk we run is that we have sometimes that we have a backbone which is more developed and another one which is less developed. Or if you talk about inland areas, you may have territories which, because of the depopulation, territories which cannot plan their future. So we lose huge opportunities because we do not guarantee normal possibilities to all regions to, in a way, fulfill. And this in any area in Italy. Only if we are all together in this big challenge, then can we highlight territorial autonomies and their abilities. Otherwise, the risk is that of selfishness, and we have to avoid that. So yesterday we were talking about this with Minister Gelmini. The central power can be virtuous in reaching the peripheries. I believe that the time of choosing is now. It is now the time to choose. At the moment, this is the right moment because actually almost all political forces are in government. We have a prime minister who is internationally acknowledged as an authoritative personality. So there are no alibis for us to postpone decisions or for us not to find solutions that can help us find a different future for the country. The responsibility is the responsibility of the national government, however, but in a constant dialogue with local governments and with regions. I believe that, for example, if we start from education, which is actually so important for the Rimini meeting and also so dear to me as well, We are on the verge of the school year, the opening of the school year. And however, for after 2 years, the school will have students in presence. And also when it comes to education, clearly, quality standards in terms of competencies, I mean, it is the state that has to set the standards. However, when you pass from education to the search for a job, I mean, that competence has to be adapted to territories. And it is not by chance that the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, when it comes to education, also focuses on technical education. If with this reform we are capable to bring competencies down to territories, communicate with businesses, and then give businesses the skills they need to do their business, then we will have given our young people a job and not just an income without doing nothing. I mean, this is our task. We have to lay the foundations for a different future. A future in which our young people can remain here, where they can actually get here the competencies and the professionalism they need to express their talent. And this can be done once again within a climate of cooperation. I am very confident today we have the possibility of implementing a reform through which autonomy can be differentiated, and a reform through which we are not only giving more competences to the regions capable of managing, but then through this management of competences, we can at the same time eliminate red tape and simplify. We have to give also managerial skills to the region. So the simplification that we are currently experimental in our bureaucratic system is probably the result of a lack of synergy with the regions and of our inability to define the cognitive and also managerial competencies that we need, because if they were applied with the subsidiarity principle, they can actually provide good results. Professor Cassese, very briefly, we had the Rimini meeting. And actually, I think this is the fertile ground on which we can think about these topics.
So, Professor, a mechanism where, I don't want to say better and worse, I'll say the most performing regions can help a less performing region. Can we imagine this kind of mechanism, this kind of system? Is it possible? Is it too visionary? We think we can actually think about something like that. We have all the tools to do this. We have best practices that were mentioned by the other participants. And this means not only copying, but also helping, teaching. But I have a motion, actually. I have an appeal, that is to say the use of certain concepts. Today, many talked about centralization, decentralization. Well, these are concepts that were forged 2 centuries ago, when you needed 2 days in order to go from Florence to Rome, when there was no telephone, there was no internet. People could not talk to other people from one region to the other, like we're doing now. So we have to bear all these things in mind, because the world has changed completely. So centralization and decentralization are concepts that cannot survive. So what I tried to say from the very beginning is that we needed to have cooperation among peers. So there is not someone who is actually at the top and someone who is at the bottom of some kind of hierarchy. So we needed to find the tools to actually can boost our country. We are in a period of economic stalemate, and we have or stagnation, and we have a situation where, being the fifth or the sixth industrial power in the world, we have now gone back more or less to the level of the 1950s. So we have to leave behind the concepts of the past and find new incentives in order to make our nation something that is inclusive in terms of state, municipalities, regions, and the whole of the social structure, in order to make our nation more effective. So, well, on following these words, we just have like a few minutes left, so we don't have much time. Let's try and summarize what we said today. Let's start with you, President Toti. Well, it is very easy. Once we conclude our debate today, let's start working. Either the pandemic makes us better, not only from the institutional point of view, that is to say democracy, balance, justice, but also efficiency of the system and institutions that are in a way an interface between research, universities, businesses. So, well, that's what it means to really have a recovery in this country. Then President Kompatscher said something that, well, is really important. Italy actually, or rather our institutions did actually manage to pass the stress test. So let's try to work in a way that doesn't destroy what we already have built over this time of crisis. So we don't have much time. The National Plan for Recovery and Resilience should be applied to all the different issues, and in 2026, Italy should become a machine with institutions that are functioning, and I'm talking about not only political leaders, but also industrial leaders, representatives of universities, trade unions, the civil society. Yesterday, that well, the president of Confindustria was talking to the trade unions from this very hall, this very stage. So, well, let's create an assembly that close up the period of the pandemic for a new Europe. Next generation Europe, that's what we talk about. So this is extremely important, because when you start to work in the field of politics, if you invest in the present, you will have consensus in the present, but if you invest in the future, you will get consensus in the future, but you won't be there to enjoy it. So let's do our best.
Acquaroli, e poi voglio sentire il professore che ci ha ascoltato.
President Kompatscher, so please, you have the word. I really liked what the minister said, because we want really to enhance and improve what already works, the idea of a differentiated autonomy. We are really just like 500,000 inhabitants in my region, but thanks to our autonomy, we are the most important net payer of the country. And if you let us work, we can obtain better results. So now well, in the past we received funds, now we are contributors. So I can think we can do very important things, and now we have these big challenges to face, as the climate change, and our young people that are afraid that we are facing an apocalyptic scenario, and we are not doing anything. So we need to take brave choices and work together.
Well, It's very difficult to draw to a close when addressing such difficult topics. I think we should start from a very important prerequisite. Actually, at the moment, we all have to work together for a big project that can provide the necessary answers to the country. We have this opportunity today. The institutional chain has to work at all levels so that the priorities we believe are necessary for Italy to start again are reached by 2026. But I would like to focus on one element which, in my opinion, is fundamental. Differences are a value. They are a huge value, and they have all of these differences have to be highlighted for our common answer. So we need to take differences into account, and they are a value, especially in Italy, because Italy is full of major resources from the north to the south. Apparently, these resources are opposite one to the other, but most of the times, if they are highlighted, I think they can actually bring Italy to a position in which it is leading in the world. So, Professor Cassese, I just have 4 minutes. So I'd like to ask for your final comment. I talked about this session being the continuation of the meeting we had last year. Probably next year there will be the same continuation. So how can we be successful? It will be successful. We are successful if we are able to, in a way, fulfill the objectives set by the Constitution. The Italian Constitution wanted regions to, in a way, save the state. So when the first laws were drafted that would then lead to the regions, this phrase was often to be found. I mean, the regions would have to save the state. And in order for them to do so, you have to abandon old concepts, the old concepts I mentioned before. And then we need to think that actually regions help building the state with a bottom-up approach and not the other way around. This is a concept that kind of reverses the old idea that actually the state has some kind of a prince or a king from which power stems, and that the regions are the ones which represent power and which actually rebuild the fabric of the state. However, to do that, regions have to take on a national responsibility. They cannot act as small minor states, and our country cannot be extremely varied in their reaction to extraordinary events, as was the case with the pandemic. So they need to coordinate their work. They have to speak with a single voice because they have shared. They have different interests, but they have one common goal, which is that of having institutions work better in the interest of the Italian society. So, Madam Minister, I have just 1 minute, but I would like you to draw to a close, actually. With just 1 minute, as Professor Cassese said before, we need to know in order to decide. So, the ingredients of a common recipe for the country are, first of all, competence, knowledge, and going deeper into the details of a topic. Actually, unfortunately, we know a lot about COVID, about the pandemic, but it's also necessary to be brave enough to make decisions. Politics has to be humble. Politicians have to be humble to listen to their citizens, and this leads to a fundamental factor, which is trust. As a country, we need to regain our trust in ourselves, in the state, in the institutions. Well, actually, fortunately, we've been a season in which actually institutions were kind of considered those to blame. But actually, with the pandemic, this has changed. I think the fundamental factor to face the future is that of having trust, of conquering the trust of our citizens, and also of being confident and trustful in the strength of Italy and in all of us. So Let me go back to Professor Simoncini, who is hosting us here, and the Vice President of the Foundation of the Meeting for Friendship Among the People. I just have a final word. I'd like just to use one word, which is, which might sound trivial, but it is the following word: thank you. Thank you very much to our dear guests, Madam Gelmini and the Presidents Kompatscher, Toti, and Acquaroli. A special thanks goes to Professor Cassese. What we saw today is actually an example of good communication, of good dialogue, of a positive relationship, of good coordination. This is actually what Professor Cassese had recommended us last year, and I think that we made a step forward this year in this dialogue. So thank you very much, because we've seen an example of very good dialogue between institutions and of what the Italian Republic in its unity and in its capacity of actually bringing differences, of bridging the gap between differences. And then a special thanks also to Roberto Inciochi, because it is not easy to to lay the foundations for all these different realities to communicate. So I would like to leave the floor back to him to thank you. Well, I would like to thank you. We've I spent already a couple of days, here at the Rimini meeting, and it's really wonderful to be here and exchange ideas. And we've been given the chance to do this actually in presence. All of this is possible thanks to the donors who can support the Rimini meeting. As you've probably seen, there are some counters with the red heart label on them. This is a meeting that has been going on for 42 years, so there have been 42 editions in which we've been given the chance to have fruitful exchanges of ideas. So many thanks to Mariastella Gelmini, thanks for being with us, and thanks also to Giovanni Toti, thanks to Arno Kompatscher, thanks to President Francesco Acquaroli, thanks to Professor Cassese, and also Professor Simoncini. And thanks for being with us. Have a nice day. Thank you.